Now, Cop28, the climate conference in Dubai, is drawing to a close after overrunning by one day, and there's a big fuss about the wording around fossil fuels in a new draft deal, which has finally been agreed.
So has it been a success or a complete waste of time? Let's ask our favourite environmentalist, Mr. Ed Gemmell from the Climate Party. You know my view about this, complete waste of time. Tell us, first of all, what they have agreed and why it's been so contentious.
Right, well, they're talking about a transition away from fossil fuels within the energy system. So at least that's in there, because nothing like that has been in there before. The original wording that a lot of the countries were trying to get in was phase down, and that was supported by over 100 countries, but it never made it. But it's also only about the energy system. Now, that isn't everything, as we know. I mean, this is the thing that Labour's talking about to some extent. They're talking about the energy system. It's part of what we need to do. It's not all of it. But also it's about the really pathetic wording that comes out of it. So the parties have agreed in their nationally determined ways to look at the transition away from. So they're nationally determined. Their nationally determined manner, actually, is the word using. What's the nationally determined manner? You know, I mean, it gives them all this flexibility to do whatever they like to.
Well, that's all right, isn't it? That because what might work for us here wouldn't necessarily work in Dubai, wouldn't necessarily work in Sweden or Germany. I quite like a national decision-making process, Ed.
Right, exactly. But then you're not getting what this whole thing is set out to do, is to get a global agreement on what's actually going to happen.
Don't like global agreements, Ed.
Now, the one actual thing that's in it, well, don't worry, this one has no effect whatsoever. So, I mean, I think we're in agreement in some accepts. It's talking about, as well, doing what's needed to get to net zero by 2050, to accelerating us towards it. Now, and then it says in keeping with the science. But there's nothing in the science that says getting to net zero by 2050 is exactly the right thing to do. And in fact, the science that was brought out at Cop26 is saying that the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees runs out in 2028. So there's nothing in the science that suggests this. I actually think that the Chinese will be rubbing their hands in glee at this particular thing. We've agreed something, it's not very strong, people are not going to take action, and they keep making a lot of money by leading this enormous energy transition in their particular country at the moment.
Did any country say, no, we're not signing up to this?
Not in the end.
Pathetic. How can you have that sort of much agreement? It's ridiculous.
Well, it's because the system requires 100% agreement at the end. So they negotiate to get 100% agreement on something that's not binding. Right. So, I mean, completely ridiculous. Now, there are some good bits. Now, the idea of ramping up renewables 3 times by 2030. There is a bit in about doubling the rate at which we are increasing efficiency. Not doubling the efficiency in the power system, but doubling the rate at which we increase the efficiency, which is a terribly, terribly low bar. If it's being increased 1% a year at the moment, we might be increasing it by 2%. And then there's also some good stuff in about road transport and phasing down of unabated coal. But again, not phasing out coal or phasing down coal in any sense.
The fact this is held in the United Arab Emirates, I mean, I laughed out loud when I heard it's going to be there. And the president of the conference, who drafted the final communique, works for Abu Dhabi Oil Company.
Oh,
I mean, you couldn't make this up.
Well,
the average village idiot wouldn't pick a petrostate to hold it and then put the CEO of an oil company in charge. But then also the average village idiot wouldn't then put the next one in another petrostate supported by Russia, Azerbaijan, for next year.
And that's almost a satellite state of the Kremlin.
Certainly supported in the way forward. So we're moving straight into exactly the same thing in a year's time. But let's actually look at, I mean, should we be holding this at all?
No.
Well, OK, I know your view is no. My view is totally changed. Yes, but a completely different thing. I mean, we've got 84,000 or more delegates here. The number of delegates here has gone up 2,000% since the original one in Berlin in 1995.
Because it's a jolly.
Well, no, absolutely.
It's profitable.
Absolutely. Those who produce Chardonnay are rubbing their hands in glee all the time as they look at it. But the second part about it is when the UNFCCC was originally brought into place, let's say in 1994, it was talking about stabilising the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That was the aim. So stabilising it. You know, what we're at today, don't let it go up. We've increased it by 60% in that time as well, and we're still increasing it because we're pumping more in every year. So we haven't done anything that we were aiming to do decades ago. It's not getting there. What do we need to do? Cut that 84,000 people down to 1,000 to 2,000, get the right negotiators there, pick the topics, get in there, hammer it out over 3 or 4 days, get out.
I want to know your perspective specifically on this, because you consider yourself to be a right-leaning environmentalist. if you kind of accept that actually it's corporations that run the world now, they have the governments are their little puppets on their strings, but it's the corporations that are running the world, and there is money to be made from the green agenda, you would say, well, that's a good thing, because if you can make profit as well whilst also improving the planet, then that's what we want to do. But how do people on the street make money from this movement? Well, not just the global corporations.
A couple of things tied up together. Just let's go from COP down into the people on the street. I mean, what has happened at COP is we've got this sort of general direction. OK, we've got a sort of general direction of movement, a bit of an acceptance of it, which opens up opportunities because we do have more than 85% of the world's GDP now on a net zero pathway. So there are opportunities there. And at the moment, the Chinese are minting it in with what they're doing on renewables. They are dominating the world. But for us, the opportunity is still open. Because the world hasn't committed to real action, Britain could leap ahead now and start getting the action going, unleash the city, which the Prime Minister has talked about recently as well. But this would unleash the city if we brought our targets forward and grabbed the opportunity. And then, for the man in the street, the average person, you and I and everybody else, there would be the opportunity to have more money coming into the country because we increase the amount of goods that we're exporting, we increase our industrial capacity, we start to lower our trade deficit, hopefully turn it the opposite way round and have a positive balance of payments, and then we start having more money for the NHS, for the police, for social services, and for everything we want to be doing here.
I'm with you on part of that, Ed, but I just don't see how it ends up in the pockets of normal people. But we will have to carry that on.